is the Prosperity Podcast, and I'm Bruce Williams. I'm with the South Island Prosperity Partnership. We are an alliance of 11 First Nation and municipal governments, private business and industry, nonprofits, industry associations, all associated with the South Vancouver Island region or the Greater Victoria region. With me today is Christina Clarke, who is not only a board member of South Island Prosperity, she is the CEO of the Songhees Development Corporation. Christina, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I want to begin by acknowledging that where I'm sitting right now is in the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, in particular the Songhees, which you know well, and the Esquimalt First Nations. You, however, are in the territory that doesn't fall within that footprint. Tell me where you are.
Chianu territory. I live in the Spirit Bay development on the Chianu First Nation, Beecher Bay.
Right, which is near Beecher Bay, exactly.
Beautiful.
So Christina, thank you. You have an ongoing relationship with this organization as a board member, and you're sort of a connection for us with what the Indigenous economy, which we'll talk about in a minute, looks like. But I first of all want to reference something that you were a part of creating last week for our little e-blast that we do every week. Before this particular COVID crisis came along, there were parts of our communities that were already in huge crisis, and that would be the reserves, the First Nation race. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, and I've found this whole thing a little bit fascinating, and I've been started calling it the COVID shift. And it seems like there's shifting societal attitudes towards inequality or pre-existing, particularly in the health system and our economy. With respect to our health system, we have health outcomes among First Nations living on reserve that are appalling. We have 50% greater incidence of heart and stroke. We have 17.7% rate of diabetes on reserve when the national average is 5%. Infant mortality is double, and life expectancy for men is 73 versus 79 for non-Indigenous, and for women 78 versus 83 for non-Indigenous. So we have already a situation where a segment of our population in Canada is experiencing suffering. Health, their health is suffering already. And with COVID, it's as though when we're all suffering and we're all experiencing an existential crisis, we started to think, not so much, we're all in this together, we're all one. And looking at it from that perspective, we could see that the experience is not the same for everyone. The inequalities become glaringly obvious all across our society. And that is the homeless population. We're all now more aware and more concerned about seniors and how they're cared for in our society. So it's like we woke up all together to conditions that were existing. People knew since the Truth and Reconciliation, people were aware, but I think that there was a feeling of this problem is so great, we barely know where to begin, and how are we ever going to get there? And I feel with COVID, it broke everything down. Our whole economy comes to a grinding halt. We realize that health is the most important thing. And in that context, we look back at what we had, and you can see how out of balance it has been. Not only the disparities in the health system, the work-life balance. I mean, it's very interesting that when the kids are out of school, how does the economy operate? Because children being in school is, in large part, it's also about daycare. Yeah. So our education system and our ways of learning and how we balance family life and work life and school life was out of balance. And this is laying all of that bare for us to pay attention to and presenting an opportunity to, as we rebuild our economy, do it differently.
To take a look at that whole systemic issue of the conditions of health and the conditions of living on reserve goes back a long way, even off reserve. We can never lose sight of the fact colonization happened. My ancestors got here and told the existing people that were living here, well, you don't get to live where you live anymore. We're going to put you over there. So there's that part of it. Then they took away the right of parents to parent their children and children to be parented by their parents by putting them in residential schools. That still has huge resonance right now. And a lot of these problems go directly back to that because frankly, they have mental challenges, they self-medicate, all to deal with the pain of all of that.
Yes. Yes, and I would add to that Steve's scoop. And that was related to the damage done by residential schools to the family unit
Mhm.
And that the powers that be in the 60s felt the solution to that was to apprehend children.
Mhm.
And the ramifications of that are still rippling across our society. Very, very, very tremendous trauma across so many communities, and it's visceral and real. I mean, removing your children, that is about as painful a thing as most people can even imagine. And we have communities where that is prevalent across the community. It's a shared trauma, and it's certainly not it happened historically as well, but it is currently still happening in many
So it's
ways,
still,
despite the efforts to change it by many people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, trying to change it. But a lot of these, the the results of the trauma that happened, they're long lasting and endemic, and it took generations to get here, and it's going to take generations to recover. But maybe we can accelerate that recovery.
yeah, the reconciliation process, I'll come back to. I will say that one of the things that I've learned in being a part of South Island Prosperity is my privilege of being able to work with First Nations leaders. And I take the liberty quite often of asking them, what's your connection to residential schools? And so said, well, my mother was in one, my father was in one. And they see the effects of that in their family. And so many of them work so hard to get over that. But the pain is obvious and the pain is there. And I personally don't feel enough people in the general population understand that. Some people, in fact, would almost deny it, saying, well, this is Canada. That can't happen here. Absolutely happen here. And those scars and those marks are deep, and they're very, very prevalent in the culture. But to go to the reconciliation part, because we are the Economic Development Agency, the reconciliation process, economically, socially, and all the rest of it, Christina, how can this intervention of COVID into the way life is happening impact this reconciliation process? Do you feel, are you optimistic that it can accelerate all of that?
I am, and part of the reason for that is what I've witnessed over the last, and I was sitting with members of Songhees Nation in a board watching the apology by the Prime Minister. And really, the Conservative government was no friend to Indigenous people. But that was a very powerful and moving moment. And a lot of people in the room, and it meant a lot, but they said, it won't mean anything if nothing changes.
Mhm.
And then we went through the period of the Truth and Reconciliation hearings. And so many Canadians paid attention to what was happening, read about what was happening, attended those hearings. And the truth piece became really real and widespread across Canada. And so what I've witnessed since then, and then we had the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, the commission and the calls to action, which tell governments and institutions and individual Canadians what we can each do. And what I've noticed and witnessed, and I think is a beautiful thing, is how many Canadians take that to heart as an individual thing. Reconciliation has to happen within every Canadian, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We have to reconcile with our past and with what happened. We have to come to terms with it, all of us together. So reconciliation is it's an act that we do and continue to do to build a future that all Canadians can be proud of, that really fits what we believe Canada to be. There's a disconnect between how we want to be as Canadians and how we present ourselves to the world, and some of the things that we do at home, which used to be done in silence and sort of hidden as a national shame, but now it's out in the open, and the world can witness it and want to change it. So I have tremendous hope that we were already on a path of reconciliation, but I feel that this can accelerate it if we maintain this enhanced awareness about the inequalities that we have in our society, and we continue to hold on to the feeling that we can't have a healthy economy and a healthy society until all of us are healthy and vibrant, and that all segments of our society, all genders, all ages, all ethnic, cultural, um, racialized, if you will, people in society.
In the world of working from home, by the way, that's a leaf blower. It's next door to where we live. So just,
Have a power
you have a
washer.
power washer, yeah, next door going on there. So one other small point on that, you and I were both part of something that we did last year in November called the Indigenous Prosperity Gathering, where we gathered Indigenous leaders and First Nation leaders from this region together, a graphic recording done, which is one of those things where an artist draws actions and takes words down verbatim what people say. One of the most compelling things from that was the thing that came out of someone's mouth when they said that there are certain actions that remind them of John A. Macdonald's statement of trying to kill the Indigenous child. Exactly what he tried to do.
Yes.
It's not a political thing I'm saying, it's just it was the culture of the time. This child that John A. Macdonald tried to kill. And that's why the John A. Macdonald statue was an issue at Victoria City Hall that a lot of people couldn't come. So
yeah.
Anyhow.
Yes, he said we must kill the Indian in the child.
Okay.
So kill the language, kill the cultural traditions, kill the connection to land.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a deliberate act.
Yeah. So in reconciliation terms, Christina, is there such a thing as the Indigenous economy? Is it a part of the fabric of the general economy, or is the Indigenous economy have its own sort of DNA and its own branding?
It's an interesting thing to think about, because for economies to function well, they have to be very integrated. Everything fits together. We have systems that where we accelerate businesses, where we there's all kinds of systems in place for our economy and to make it work well together. But some of those systems are just not there for Indigenous people. And maybe it'd be helpful to share an analogy with sports. And this was from iSpark when we were doing our bid for the North Indigenous Games, and we were talking about the journey of an athlete. And the goal is the Olympics for most people. And in the mainstream world, there's a series of steps that you take that get you to the Olympics. And these steps sort of lay out in front of you as a possibility. But in an Indigenous context, there's a bunch of missing steps. They're just not there. And you can't just plug into the mainstream system, because we're literally operating in different systems on reserve. So we need connecting point in order to be able to have that ladder work for everybody. So it's not that it's a separate economy, it's that it's a section of our economy that's been segmented and isolated. It's isolated by the reserve system and the crazy laws that go around that make it very challenging, even to do something as simple as getting a business license. If you're on reserve, you can't get one. So you have to look for like a multi-jurisdictional one. We were looking for a business license for our food truck. Our poor staff, they went around to every municipality asking for one before we found a means for that. We just used our lawyer's address in Victoria to get one. But it's an example of a simple thing. There's systems that just don't work in a non-reserve context. Provincial law, for example, in most cases doesn't apply on reserve. So wherever something is regulated provincially, we have a gap that we have to fill on reserve. So that means everything that we do in a business context, we have to modify within these structures that we have, which adds a layer of complexity and difficulty. It's especially challenging for entrepreneurs trying to find their way in this system that we have without the supports that are available to most other folks. So we need ways to, and I don't want to say that we need to mainstream an Indigenous economy, because I think that there are some beautiful, unique aspects that make it Indigenous, that are at the heart of Indigenous people when they do business, that will always show in how they do business. But what we need is economic integration, so that those companies have access to markets and people have access to all of the services and the products that can be purchased through Indigenous business.
People that are watching this, if you get a chat, this could be a whole other conversation to talk about the Indian Act, but Google that, look it up and see what it is. And you'll see that sort of thing has a long way to go too. That's not a political statement. I'm just saying that the way that that's set up right now, that is a challenge to progress and prosperity for sure. Christina, to wrap it up, I want to talk about what's going to be going on as we move out of this. There are some that are sort of shifting their ideas over, thinking, well, this is our opportunity to do better things for the planet, take better care of Earth, despite the fact that gasoline is suddenly below a dollar a liter. This is a time to make that kind of a change. Bear in mind, too, that the First Nations and the Indigenous citizens of this country and this region have been taking care of this planet for thousands and thousands of years until very recently. So you guys can lead the way with this, for sure.
Yes, and there's a few things about COVID that have intersected with that, and one of them is food security and food sovereignty.
Hmm.
And for thousands of years, this island supported its population easily and
Hmm.
bountifully. And now we're so reliant on the rest of the world that we're now looking at interruptions in our supply chain. We should have food sovereignty on this island. I think that's very important. The other thing that I find fascinating with COVID is when you look at the canals in Venice, clear, the
Hmm.
swans floating through and fish in there. And people in Paris can see the Eiffel Tower from their homes that never could before. They can see the Himalayas in India when it was just a haze. And people are experiencing fresh air like we have here all the time. People are experiencing blue sky, air. And my hope is that the, the feelings people have when they experience their environment with the impact of the industrial age lessened like it is right now, that people might realize that we can, I wouldn't say return to a time pre-industrial, but I would say that we can create a new future, perhaps very technologically advanced, where we do have balance and we do find a balance between work life and home life, and a balance between production and our environment. And as we've all been home with COVID, very little, it seems really dumb to go online and buy a bunch of clothes. It seems like, why? First of all, I only need an upperwear top to wear in a Zoom interview.
Well, you're wearing jewelry today for the first time, you said
Exactly.
too.
I put on my jewelry for the first time in
Yeah.
44 days of self-isolation. But it does kind of make us realize how unimportant all of those things are. And
Hmm.
we all go to work and we work very hard, many people for minimum wage, in order to be able to purchase all of these things, which we've just created for the benefit of shareholders out there somewhere. And it's a vicious cycle it's killing our planet, and it's damaging our families and our society with its inequities. So we have an opportunity to, because we can never say again that the climate crisis is too hard to solve because you can't see the momentum of our economy. We know we can when the emergency is great enough. And the emergency of climate change is great enough. It's just that we humans have a hard time seeing danger unless it's immediate. And I think for Indigenous people, particularly those that have been able to stay on their ancestral lands, the connection with the land is so deep and so intimate that I think a lot of newcomers, even if you've been here for several generations, you may have places that you love, but having that thousands of year old relationship with the land where you know about individual trees, I mean, in the individual life of it, and you see yourselves connected so intimately with it that you'd never poison a waterway. That's your
No.
drinking water.
Hmm.
There's no separation in an Indigenous world of the environment. So my hope is that the world will get a glimpse of what's possible. We can slow things down. We can stop producing so much material. We can start doing things in different ways to conserve and protect our environment. And we would all be much healthier and happier for it.
I want to wrap this up with something that actually you and I have done before. We convene online through Zoom, uh, all gatherings of what we call our leaders, the people who are the members of the Island Prosperity Partnership. And at the end of it all, we always say, take yourself a year ago from now and a year ahead from now. From that year ago, what do you want more of and what do you want less of a year ahead from now? And you had some very profound things to say about that, and I hope you share that with us again right now. So
Yeah,
what do you want more of and what do you want less of?
and some of that's related to what we talked about earlier, and compassion. This not so much the feeling that we're all in this together, and gratitude. The amount of you see hearts in everybody's windows if you go for
Hmm.
drives, and it says thank you, and they're thinking of health workers and people in grocery stores, frontline workers, but it's a sense of gratitude to everybody that's in this web that keeps us fed and keeps us housed. I hope that we don't let go of that. that we retain a sense of togetherness and gratitude. That would be a powerful shift. As far as what I'd like to see less of, well, in some ways, I don't want to return to exactly how things were before.
No.
The industrialization of food production. We don't need any more clues that that's a damaging thing.
Yeah.
Every pandemic that has been related to the industrial animal production. And now we're seeing what happens when you have so few meat packing plants that a few of them go down. And now we're looking at shortages.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to change our systems. And now we know we can. We can stop the world. And we should.
Christina, we appreciate and admire your wisdom all the time. Thanks so much for your time today. I know how busy you are. And we wish you and your family all the best through this. We're going to get through this. Everything's going to be fine. It's going to be different, but it's going to be fine. And just to thank you again for all that you do for all of us at South Island Prosperity Partnership. And I know the people in your Songhees family feel the same way. You're actually from the East Coast originally, aren't you?
I am, yep. I am both Irish and Inuit Métis from Labrador.
It's amazing, fascinating. Christina, thank you. All the best. And if I may, I'd say Heichka to you for all that you've done and all you continue to do.
Bruce.
Thank you. This is the Prosperity Podcast of the South Island Prosperity Partnership. Our is right there if you want to check it out. If you want, my email contact is on there. My thanks again to Christina Clarke. I'm Bruce Williams, and we'll see you next time.